Graphene, is it a silver killer? Will it replace industrial need? What is it? Where is it going? How do you position? Well, all that and more right now. Tonight, we're going to talk about something that almost nobody in the financial media is explaining correctly. Graphene. You've probably heard the pitch before. It's always the same. This miracle material is going to replace silver. It's stronger than steel, thinner than paper, more conductive than anything we've ever seen. And if you listen to that long enough, you start to believe something dangerous. That silver, one of the oldest forms of money and one of the most critical industrial metals on Earth, is about to become obsolete. That's the narrative. But tonight, we're going to ask a very simple question. Is that actually true? Or is this just another case of technological hype colliding with physical reality? Let's start with what graphene actually is. Graphene is a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a hexagonal lattice. That's it, one atom thick. And in a lab, under ideal conditions, graphene is extraordinary. It's incredibly strong. It's flexible. It conducts electricity extremely well for something that is essentially two-dimensional. And that last part is where the story starts to fall apart. Because what you are not told, what almost nobody explains, is that graphene's superpower only really exists in that form. A single, perfect, defect-free sheet. That is not how industrial materials work. That is not how manufacturing works. And that is definitely not how global supply chains work. Now compare that to silver. Silver is not theoretical, not experimental, not sitting in a lab waiting to be scaled. Silver is already everywhere. It's in your phone. It's in your solar panels. It's in electric vehicles. It's in medical equipment. It's in the electric grid itself and so much more. It's, most importantly, it's there for a reason. Silver is the most electrically conductive material on Earth. Not in theory, in reality. Bulk conductivity, real-world performance, industrial scale. There is no debate about that. So when somebody tells you that graphene is going to replace silver, the first thing you should ask is, replace it where? Because materials don't compete in headlines. They compete in specific applications. And when you actually break that down, something very interesting happens. Graphene starts winning, but only in a very few narrow categories. Flexible electronics, printed sensors, thin film coatings. Places where you don't need maximum conductivity. Places where you need flexibility or cost reduction or form factor advantages. In other words, places where silver is actually overqualified. But now, let's move into the areas that actually matter for global demand. Power transmission, high current systems, electrical contacts, industrial scale electronics, solar infrastructure, solid state batteries, that's another video. But this is where the real money is. This is where silver dominates. And this is where graphene simply does not compete. Not today, and not even close. Why? Because the real world is messy. Graphene at scale is not perfect sheets. It flakes. It's composites. It's layered material with defects. And those defects destroy conductivity. And what do manufacturers do? They mix graphene with metals. They enhance silver. They enhance copper, but they don't replace them. Think about that. The replacement technology, quote unquote, is being used to make silver better, not obsolete. And then there's the part nobody wants to talk about, infrastructure. The entire global electronics industry is built around metals, factories, tooling, supply chains, standards, reliability testing. You don't just wake up one morning and say, we're switching to graphene. That would require trillions of dollars in retooling. And for what? A material that, in most real-world conditions, still underperforms silver in the most applications that matter most. That's not disruption. That's fantasy. Now, could graphene improve? Of course it could. Technology always improves. But here's the part that investors, and frankly, most analysts, get wrong. If graphene improves dramatically, that does not mean silver demand disappears. In fact, the more likely outcome is just the opposite. Graphene expands the market. It enables new applications. It creates hybrid systems. It increases efficiency, but it does not eliminate the need for the highest performing conductive material we have, and that is still silver. So let's talk timelines, because this is where the hype really breaks down. In the next 5 years, graphene will grow, but it will grow in niches. It will not touch the core of silver demand. In the next 10 to 15 years, you may see partial substitution. Printed electronics, some solar components, certain coatings, but even then, we're talking about the margins, not the core. And beyond that, 20 years out? Sure, you could imagine a world where graphene becomes a much bigger player, but by then, the global demand for electrification, for energy, for data, for infrastructure will be exponentially larger than it is today. So even if graphene takes share, the total pie is growing. So now let's ask the question that actually matters. What happens if silver if graphene succeeds? Not hypothetically, realistically. In the base case, graphene replaces maybe 10 to 20% of industrial silver demand. And that sounds dramatic until you realize that industrial demand itself is growing. Electric vehicles, solar, grid expansion, AI infrastructure, just to name a few. All of it requires more conductivity, more reliability, more performance. So the loss of one side is offset by the growth of the other, more than. In a more aggressive scenario, maybe graphene replaces 30 to 40% in certain applications. Now, you start to feel it, but even then, silver does not disappear. It becomes more specialized, more critical, more tied to high-performance systems. And in the extreme case, the one that gets all of the headlines, graphene replaces silver entirely. Everything, solar, electronics, conductors. That would be a massive shock to the silver market, no question. But it would also require breakthroughs in manufacturing, cost, consistency, and infrastructure that are not even close to being solved today. And more importantly, it would require the world to abandon a material that already works perfectly at scale everywhere. That's not how industrial transitions happen. So what's the conclusion? Graphene is real. It is important. It will grow, but it is not a silver killer. It is a complementary technology, a selective disruptor, but not a replacement. And maybe the most important takeaway of all of this is this. The biggest threat to silver is not graphene. It's the assumption that because in the real world, especially in material science, that almost never happens. What actually happens is layering, integration, combination. Old materials don't disappear, they evolve. They become more valuable in the applications that matter most. So the next time you hear somebody say graphene is going to replace silver, ask them a very simple question. Where? And then ask a second one following up. At scale? Because until those questions have real answers, not headlines, not hype, but real answers, silver is not going anywhere. And now you know the rest of the graphene story. Build that stack. iBankerU. Good day.